Mrs. Belcher. Mommy brought me into the TV room where Bobby was playing his video games. She turned off the television and said, "I have a big surprise for you, children. We are having a special visitor today. Her name is Mrs. Belcher. She will be having lunch with us. I expect you both to be on your best behavior." My brother Bobby looked at me and shrugged his shoulders. We didn't know Mrs. Belcher, but we could tell she was important to Mommy. All he said was, "Okay, Mommy." Bobby looked at me like an older brother does when he is about to take charge. He said, "We better set the dinner table." We began to gather our dishes and silverware to help set the dining room table for Mommy. Mommy always taught us how important it was to have good table manners. She also showed us how to prepare a table with a place for everything and everything in its place. Mommy came out of the kitchen with her special, for company only, platter. It was decorated with all kinds of cheese. She put the platter at the center of the table along with a dish filled with vegetables and Mommy's favorite French onion dip. Children, when Mrs. Belcher arrives, I want you to do me a favor. Take a good look and let me know the color of Mrs. Belcher's eyes. "Why do you want to know the color of her eyes?" I asked. But Mommy never answered, because right then the front doorbell rang. "That's her," she said, and scurried into the next room to open the front door. "Remember, tell me the color of Mrs. Belcher's eyes." Mommy opened the door, and there she was, Mrs. Belcher. In an instant, she stomped into our house, right past Mommy, and put her arms around me and Bobby.
"Give me some sugar, children,"
she said, hugging us tightly. Mother announced, "These are my children, Beatrice. This is Bobby, and this is Katie." So her name is Beatrice, I thought. Beatrice Belcher. Mommy continued, "Give Mrs. Belcher a hug, children. She came all the way from Brooklyn." "Beatrice Belcher from Brooklyn?" Bobby whispered to me. We both smiled. And then we both remembered what Mommy asked us to do. We both remembered at the same time. What color are her eyes? We could see behind her glasses. They were brown. Mrs. Belcher tossed her pocketbook onto the living room sofa and turned to Mommy.
"Enough of that chit-chat,"
Mrs. Belcher ordered.
"I'm hungry. Let's eat."
Somehow, Mrs. Belcher knew exactly where the kitchen was located because she marched into the room.
"Oh, cheese,"
exclaimed Mrs. Belcher when she saw the pretty platter on the table. She picked up the cutting knife and stabbed a large hunk of cheese from the plate. Holding a hunk of cheese on the end of the knife like a large lollipop, Mrs. Belcher began biting pieces of cheese off the knife.
"I love cheese. I love cheese with crackers. I love cheese with apples. I love cheese with everything. Except, I do have to be careful. When I eat cheese, it tends to make me very gassy."
Suddenly, Mrs. Belcher belched. It was very loud, and she did it at the dinner table.
Oops,
She said shyly.
did I do that?
And then, just as suddenly, she did it again.
There I go again.
She laughed.
My, that was a good one.
Mother asked, "Perhaps you would like a glass of milk, Beatrice, to settle your indigestion."
Milk?
She exclaimed.
Yes, a splendid idea. Oh, and you brought chocolate chip cookies? I love chocolate chip cookies, almost as much as I love cheese.
Mrs. Belcher picked up a chocolate chip cookie and began to dunk it into a glass of milk. Suddenly, the cookie plopped into the cup.
I hate when that happens.
Cried Mrs. Belcher as she reached for her fork. She swished the fork into the cup and pulled the soggy cookie out.
Ah, there we go. Good as new.
She said. And then she popped the mushy cookie into her mouth. And then she wiped the crumbs and milk from her mouth with her sleeve. Mrs. Belcher snatched a celery stick from Mommy's vegetable tray. She used the celery stalk the way a teacher uses a pointer in a classroom.
I love what you've done with your home. I love that painting on the wall. And those curtains are lovely. And your taste in...
Before she could finish her sentence, she knocked her glass of milk over with the celery stalk.
Oops.
She crackled.
Oh, well, no sense crying over spilt milk, as they say.
With that, she grabbed a platter of vegetables and placed it over the spilt milk.
Out of sight, out of mind, I always say,
said Mrs. Belcher as she popped another chocolate chip cookie into her mouth.
Am I right or am I right?
She said, cookie crumbs splattering from her mouth.
Oh my, I'm stuffed,
moaned Mrs. Belcher, rubbing her sizable tummy. She sat silently staring across the table. Suddenly,
now I'm done. Goodbye.
Mrs. Belcher stood up, picked up 3 chocolate chip cookies, grabbed her pocketbook, and left our home. Mommy said, "Wasn't that a lovely visit?"